So good afternoon. As you know, I've just returned from the United States where I attended Leaders Week at the United Nations. As President of the Security Council, I chaired a high-level meeting where I urged members to show greater leadership over the Syrian crisis. After more than 5 years of brutal fighting and horrific humanitarian suffering, Syria has become the gravest crisis of our time. While the meeting itself was never going to end the conflict, I believe it was the right decision to use the Council presidency to focus the world's attention on Syria. Therefore, it is of deep concern that just days later, Syrian planes, reportedly with Russian support, have launched heavy attacks on eastern Aleppo. It is despicable that civilians are bearing the brunt of the renewed fighting. The immediate priority must be to stop the fighting and the targeting of civilians. Parties must also commit to restoring the ceasefire, delivering aid to those who need it, and restarting political talks. As our ambassador said at the emergency meeting of the Security Council today, the Council needs to remain closely engaged on Syria. We will do everything we can in our remaining 3 months on the Council to ensure it does all it can to end the conflict in Syria. People of Syria deserve this much. During my time in New York, I also had a number of bilateral meetings, including with the new British Prime Minister Theresa May and Iraqi Prime Minister al-Abadi. I also pushed the case for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, reiterating that we cannot allow fear or narrow domestic interests turn us away from open global trading systems, which help create jobs and raise income. Therefore, I welcome the priority the US administration has placed on the TPP's passage through Congress this year. This is an unprecedented opportunity to bring into force an agreement that is in all of our interests. My visit to Houston was also a good opportunity to push the trade, business, investment and tourism links between our two countries. Just in terms of my activities this week, I'm in Auckland tomorrow and back in Wellington on Wednesday for the swearing in of the new Governor General, Dame Patsy Reddy. I'm also in Nelson on Thursday and Auckland on Friday. On Saturday, I'm hosting Sri Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. This will be the first official visit by the Sri Lankan Prime Minister to New Zealand, so it's an important step in growing the relationship between our two countries. We'll discuss a wide range of issues including trade, regional economy and security. As you know, I'm just a little bit pressed for time today, so I really need to get out of here about 4:15 if I can.
Prime Minister, are Indian students similar to Chinese bridges?
Look, I think Kamal actually himself has said that was an unfortunate turn of phrase. You probably could have chosen a better analogy, and I'm sure in the future he will do so.
Have you given him a tell-on?
No, say it's in the media report and obviously try to use an analogy because he himself said it was a poor one.
Have you talked about the Supreme Court ruling that came up today?
Yeah, we had the Minister of Corrections was away today. She's got flu, unfortunately, but the Minister of Justice gave Cabinet a bit of an update on where things are at. I think it's fair to say that we, in terms of where we go from here, and the wider issue of whether compensation could or should be payable, is at this point very uncertain. So we've asked Crown Law to provide Cabinet some advice and the Minister some advice. They haven't done that in a sort of fulsome form yet. We've had a chance to have a bit of a brief look at it, but we'll need to work our way through it over time and get some consideration of what happens next.
Is there any figure quoted by the Justice Minister in talking about possible compensation?
Not really. I mean, there's a historic sort of number that typically you can go and look at the sort of standardised figure that's used if people are imprisoned incorrectly, and while it's not sort of hard and fast as a broad sort of tariff, but whether that would apply, whether that the government would pay compensation, whether it legally needs to, they're all matters that are yet to be very much determined.
In principle, would you have any objection to a retrospective clearing of the state's obligation to pay compensation?
That's all yet to be considered. I think it's worth making the point that from 2003 there were a number of cases taken to the Court of Appeal, as I understand it. In each case the court ruled on the basis that the Corrections Department were administering the law. So it isn't an error, if you like, by corrections. It's the legal interpretation, the way the courts believed it should be interpreted, and the way we believe the then Labor legislation. What's subsequently happened, of course, is that there's been now ruling the other way from the Supreme Court. And so, in principle, I think you can certainly put up the case to say that the government of the day thought this was the way the law should apply. It was tested on numerous occasions, and the courts interpreted it the same way. And now the left field we've got a different decision, but nevertheless we need to deal with that.
So in principle, you wouldn't be object to that clarity being retrospectively created?
That's a possibility, but I wouldn't say necessarily a probability at this point. We haven't received any advice, and there are many sort of possible ways this could go, including potentially test cases or the like. So we just need to wait and see how we think we should progress, but we just don't have that advice yet from Crown Law in any enforcement way.
So compensation could be on the table?
Well, there's just a big range of options. I guess that's potentially one, but not necessarily the only one.
And one option would be putting legislation through the House that would retrospectively change the nature of these people's prison sentences.
Technically, yes, that's possible. So if we were to do that, then simply Parliament would be saying this was the understanding of what we passed back in 2002, and that was the way that the courts had interpreted it up until this point.
Did you discuss that specifically tonight?
Well, I think it's fair to say it was just a sort of broad discussion in terms of getting an understanding of a little bit of the history, the sorts of cases, the broad sort of numbers, and what it might mean, but no clarity really on what happens next. So,
What was the broad numbers?
I think it'd be better for me to leave it at this point because it's quite wide ranging.
Given last week the opposition to the electricity authority's transmission pricing proposals came to Wellington.
Yeah.
What's your view on the EA's proposals? Do you think they should go ahead, or can you see the point that people like John Carter's trying to make?
Oh, look, those who do well out of the rulings will obviously be fairly quiet at this stage, and those that don't do so well will obviously voice their case. I think there's a lot of water to flow under the bridge before these changes actually happen. For a start off, I think they're going through a process where they're considering feedback. The Electricity Authority may well come back and have another look at this matter, and as we know, it's a sort of fairly litigious area where it's highly likely whatever decision they make, it will be challenged in court. So my view of it would be nothing's going to happen quickly.
Just on the Heron report, do you still have confidence in the ministry and MPI?
I do. I mean, my reading of the report is that MPI erred, as Mike Heron said, but they did so because they believed that the camera footage that they had wasn't admissible. Now, that was because the footage, as I understand, was taken for one reason, and they were theoretically applying it for another. I think there are some lessons that come out of that. There's certainly a multitude of changes which are happening going forward, and not solely as a result of the Heron report, but you can see the advancements that are happening in terms of cameras on boats, observers on boats, and all those sorts of issues. But in 2 of the 3 cases, he found that MPI had acted appropriately, and the 3rd case, what he found was that they're probably on balance, should have taken the prosecution, but their legal interpretation, as I understand it, was that they counter-viewed.
Have you seen the legal advice that
I haven't seen it. No, I haven't seen the report.
Do you know what that legal advice was, whether it was you've got enough evidence here to prosecute or not?
No, but I haven't seen the advice, but I mean, MPI considered the matter, as I understand it, considered they weren't in a position to be able to prosecute. That was their interpretation.
Yeah, because there's been a whole lot of different conflicting stories that have come out of MPI from officials who have now left about what that legal advice said. The report refuses to release it.
Well, I think like all of these things, they're always a judgment. For a start off, it's not new news that a department or the government's not releasing legal advice for a whole lot of reasons. There's a precedent that says that we don't do that. So I can't recall too many occasions where we've ever released legal opinion. Secondly, I mean, like everything in life, legal advice is literally that, it's advice, but it's generally never definitive. The best QC in the world will tell you that, if you've got the strongest case in the world, there's a high probability you'll win, but never give you 100% probability. And that's true of legal advice. They sum up the facts for you, tell you what they think will happen, but there are guarantees. So, I think if MPI had believed that they could have taken a successful prosecution, I suspect they probably would have lied and had extensive discussions with them about it.
Is it just unfortunate then that commercial, those who are dumping fish weren't prosecuted?
Well, I think there was just a difference of opinion, and as I understand it, the difference of opinion was about whether the case would stack up and whether the evidence and the footage that they had recorded would be admissible, is the way I understood it.
Do you know if any heads have rolled at the ministry?
Not aware of that. You have to ask Martin Dunn.
Do you think Nathan Guy should stay in the role?
Oh, I think Nathan's done a very good job. I don't think there's any question about the minister. In fact, he's been making a lot of changes in terms of toughening up, ensuring that there's proper procedures on these boats, and that's everything from the city cameras to observers. The fact that someone might have a legal view that says, look, you're not on as strong a ground as you think, that's the nature of decision making that happens in departments every single day. I mean, there are numerous prosecutorial bodies that every day have to make a line call whether they think they can take action or not. We've also seen it going the other way, where from time to time the police will take a case on evidence they believe is admissible and the judges will throw it out. So it's not a one-way street.
Just, we've got some sort of leaks out of MPI. And according to emails, the reason that they didn't prosecute is because they didn't want to upset the skippers who they'd agreed to install cameras on the boats. It wasn't the legal advice. What's your response?
Well, A, I haven't seen the emails. Second, I don't know the people in question. Third, I wasn't around the event. But people often have their own interpretation of things, and that's true within government departments. One person will have one view, someone will have another, and often they'll express that that's the reason that they believe it's the case. In my opinion, I can only work on the advice I've received, and the advice I've received is that they didn't believe they could go ahead with a successful prosecution.
Those officials who have said that they couldn't prosecute because of the legal advice, do you think they've misled the public because it's turned out to be?
Well, just because somebody else has a counter view doesn't mean they're correct. That's their interpretation. You can go around this building and ask people on any particular event, and you'll get a series of different opinions of it. Doesn't mean that they're right.
But they're, these are the officials who went public saying.
Well, they often are people that have their own particular perspective or their own axe to grind. I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong. I simply don't know. But what I'm saying is that I don't think that the Ministry of Primary Industries has a particular reason not to take a prosecution if it thinks it can successfully take one. Regulatory bodies, where they have the authority, do that all the time. But as I said to you earlier, they also can get these cases thrown out from time to time.
So education series in the Herald today, is it concerning that so many kids at low decile schools are doing non-academic?
Well, I think the curriculum is wide in our system, and one of the things that's seen as highly successful about the New Zealand education system is that the curriculum is broad and wide. If that encourages a student to stay engaged in schooling, then that's something that can be positive, and sometimes kids do need a bit of encouragement to stick with the program, if you like. But obviously, in the end, the purpose of education is to prepare people for a life outside of school, and that's to give them the skills and the capability to go on and get employment and do the things they want to do in their life. So, I think schools do a pretty good job of generally balancing that up.
Do you think the government's targets are influencing schools to steer students into easier?
I don't. I think for the most part, teachers take their responsibilities very seriously, which is that they're preparing youngsters for their futures in front of them, making sure that they're equipped with the skills to allow them to be part of the modern economy that we now face. I think there'll always be a range of interests and a range of different programs. It's not new that you could get NCEA credits for lower skilled disciplines. We've seen those sort of stories around before, but and I'm not the absolute expert, don't check with the Paraza's office, but up to certain levels you're required to do certain courses, and for the most part, anyway, ultimately if you're trying to go on to either further education or impress an employer, ultimately you've got to demonstrate you've got a certain range of skills.
Did you discuss the Pinky mandate today?
There's sort of a brief discussion about how we move forward potentially. I mean, You'll recall, I think it was back in 2013 on Waitangi Day, I gave a speech, where we were very much encouraging Ngāpuhi to move forward. As I've always said, when it comes to treaty settlements, they'll only ever be successful if you have willing participants on both sides, and they have to be full and final. So I don't think it's revolutionary or new news to say that there's some contention about who holds the mandate. I guess it's disappointing that they haven't made faster progress. It's a huge issue for the far north. It's an extremely large iwi, and the sorts of nominal numbers that have been talked about in the treaty settlement would make a huge difference, I think, in what is a pretty poor community in Northland. So we would hope that they can sort out those mandating issues, but it's at the moment something that's a little beyond our control. But we certainly haven't given up hope of finding a way forward.
I mean, you may have seen that Australia is adopting the social investment approach to welfare, as New Zealand has. Can I take back to a question on that? You implemented it after an extensive consultation process. What was the biggest hurdle for New Zealand implementing this approach?
By far the biggest issue is that we allocate money on an individual vote per ministry, but we're asking under the social investment approach for effectively those individual fiefdoms to be broken down and for ministers to work collaboratively and their ministries to work collaboratively. And also there's a certain degree of a leap of faith that they're spending more money now than you might otherwise argue to save money in the longer term. Now you can back that up as we do by analysing as best you can how successful you've been. So as I understand, every 3 months they go away and have a look at the valuation of the welfare liability. They try and assess if it's reducing, how much is that of that is as a result of the sort of business's normal growing economy, and how much is as a result of programs that are running. All of this is subjective, but the government's view is that we are making a difference in some quite thorny issues by applying the social investment approach and investing more up front.
Realistically, how quickly can one break down those fiefdoms and get that change that's required?
It's a little harder than you think, but of course we need to do that because ultimately, what we do see with probably at-risk families is that there's a concentration of risks across a range of different government areas. It's always possible for a person or a family to come and see one of the government services with just a specific need around housing or truancy, whatever it might be, but very often they're quite related. There could be many different factors, which is really at the core of sort of whānau ora, really trying to sit down with the family and say, let's talk about all the issues and let's try and stop the situation. We've got sort of 10 cars up the driveway from 10 different agencies.
Last one, which is more important, the carrot or the stick?
I think both. If you think about what we did in terms of welfare reform, one of the really important things we did was work testing. I think that again put some pressure on the system for people to be looking for work, but equally we had to put investment up front, making sure that people had the skills, can put together a CV, the capability of actually getting work. So you need a bit of both.
Just going back to Ngāpuhi, is there a deadline that you've given the EU?
As I understand it, there'll be further discussion between the responsible Minister Chris and the two potential mandating groups up there. It's not really a deadline per se. I mean, the government has said by 2017 it wants to complete its negotiations with every willing group, but we've always believed that there will be some that just aren't ready to come to the table. And because they have to be full and final, the government doesn't want to go back and revisit these issues, then we can't be in a position where we just force an outcome, because if we do, A, it won't be successful, and B, actually won't be long lasting, and we can't have these things, there's not two bites of the cherry. So ultimately, to be blunt, Ngāpuhi have to work out amongst themselves to a degree who speaks for them, who's negotiating on their behalf, and we'd like to come back to the table and we're ready and willing to start going.
The government's already put about $4 million into helping them resolve the mandate. How much more are you willing to give? Or are they leaving it, abandoning ship, basically?
We can't just endlessly spend money if there's no hope of resolving who's actually speaking for them, because in the end it's part of the AIP process and it has an impact on the iwi themselves. But we'll stay engaged for as long as realistically there's hope that we can get settlement.
talks scheduled this week on the Kirby Act? And if so,
Not as far as I'm aware.
you're not involved in any billing, which is not charging.
Not as far as I'm certainly not, and I'm not aware that there was a membership.
So what's the timeline? Is there some urgency to try and solve it?
No, I don't think there's urgency. I mean, we want to resolve it, but as I said, before I went away overseas, I mean, in the end, you know, we need to find a way through, and that means, going back to the table, starting one more time, see whether we can find an outcome that's, acceptable to everybody. That including sort of artificial pressure on the process will help.
Why did the government put the mandatory appointment of iwi representatives to the Taranaki District Council in the Taranaki iwi Claims Settlement Bill? And do you accept that that actually is quite a radical constitutional move to make it mandatory?
My goodness, that's technical. You'd have to ask Chris Finlayson's office, I simply don't know.
Just going back to events in New York, we chaired the Security Council meeting on Syria. What's our sense of what a political solution would look like once the fighting's been stopped?
Well, our view is that there wouldn't be a long-term place for Assad in the governing relations. How long he could stay in place while they transition to a new leadership is yet to be determined. We're way away from that at the moment. But I suppose we've taken the view, as others have, that to get a successful outcome, you need to basically have institutions and a form of leadership and democracy, if you like, that support that. And you've seen Obama coming out criticising David Cameron and I think the French for the lack of that sort of second step, if you like, in Libya. Certainly that was one of the arguments in Iraq, that taking down Saddam Hussein himself was the easy bit, but of course it leaves exposed these groups which have historically had tensions amongst them.
Would we accept any kind of federal solution where the country was effectively divided?
From time to time you hear those discussions, and you've heard the same thing in Iraq, but
were they part of the meeting?
they weren't part of the meetings that we had. I mean, those views have been expressed to me by my officials in the past, that there is an argument that some people make. It's a pretty radical argument to make, and these things are never that simple. But I couldn't tell you that I think that there's a clear plan, not least in our mind at this point.
Just back on fishing.
Yep.
How are Kiwis meant to have faith in MPI and fisheries officers and things like that if the organisation since 2009 hasn't prosecuted these major operators for fish dump?
Well, it's as I understand it, one particular operation was the focus of my hearing report. Two of them he believed they acted appropriately. The third one he believed that they erred. I think if you look at the quota management system, which has been in operation I think now for about 30 years, it's seen as highly successful. Fish stocks have been maintained, in some areas enhanced. It's a complicated process where there are always both conflicting views and lots of different interests, from iwi to recreational fishers to commercial fishers. So in the end, what you need to look at is what the government is doing, and the government is toughening up through the use of technology and degree people to make sure that all of the players play by the rules. But I don't think you can take one person's view of events as gospel. You have to say that there are always going to be a range of views. It's a very quite both litigious and highly contested area, and it always has been.
But you must realise that Kiwis who are fishing in the Hauraki Gulf who have caught one too many fish and have been fined $200 or whatever it is. They'll look at these big fishing operators and they're just dumping tons and tons of fish.
Well,
I
don't think you can say there's been proof of, through the video footage that was taken on one operation, where on the advice of the reviewing QC, prosecution could have taken place. But it wasn't as if MPI didn't have that information. As I said, the advice I got was that they didn't do that because they believed they wouldn't be successful in that prosecution. It's quite different now.
They must have erred.
They interpreted their advice that happens all the time. I mean, if you take, I get this completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure with the Uraweras, for instance, there was a belief that they could successfully take a prosecution on the evidence they had. Some of the evidence, I think, in the end wasn't admissible and wasn't successful. So these things are always subject to opinion.
Is it a bit of a shambles, do you think, just with all those opinions going on over, multiple years with a whole lot of different people?
But that's the nature of these things. It's the nature of these kinds of investigations. Go and ask the police. The police every day go and have a look at a range of different cases that are brought before them. There are often a range of different views about whether they should prosecute or not. Crown law reviews whether a successful prosecution should take, would be likely, often gives a different opinion. These things are just not black and white. It's very simple to sit there and say this, but unfortunately in the real world, they're subjected to a whole range of different views.
But in the real world, it was wrong for 6 years.
Well, that's your view today.
That's not just my view, though. That's what the report found.
But the report found that they erred. They had a belief that they were right. It was proved to be wrong. We had a belief that it was right in terms of the way we interpreted the amount of time people spend in prison. And it was tested 3 times in court and successfully found for the government of the day to be right. And now the Supreme Court's found it's wrong. These things are just not black and white.
In the wake of your recent visit, do you think the White House has got the numbers to pass the TPP?
I think there's a possible pathway forward, and that's the advice we continue to get from the administration.
Is it 50-50?
Well, put it this way, the number of Democrats that are likely to vote for the TPP was small before this process started, and it's quite small now. So it's totally contingent on the Republicans, who voted in quite large numbers for Trade Promotion Authority. I think it will depend on quite a number of different factors. What the likely outcome of the election is, how close the result is, what Speaker Paul Ryan wants to do. There are a number of different factors.
Are you optimistic, confident?
I'm uncertain but hopeful. I don't think it's completely clear cut. I wouldn't say it's dead in the water by any stretch of the imagination. It's important to President Obama. He wants to do it. We want him to get there. And there are quite a few countries pushing him. So there's no question there's momentum, but I think it's highly contingent on what happens on election day.
Prime Minister, just on trade while you were in the UN, which nations did you push hardest on the growing tide of protectionism?
On protectionism? Oh, well, we had a wide range of discussion with lots of them. I went and spoke at the Council of Foreign Relations and made that case, which I guess you can argue there were quite a lot of people represented there. But, to all of them, we really made the case that we thought what the presidential nominees, both on the Democrat and Republican side, were saying represented a step backwards in terms of free trade, because neither of them were advocating for TPP. In varying degrees, they were arguing to put up barriers of protection. And our concern is that that happens, we'll see more of that in other countries around the world.
Did you raise that with any other leaders in bilateral meetings while you were over?
Yeah, I mean, it's just fairly generally a topic of conversation, particularly with our TPP partners. So, we have discussions with a wide range of them.
Are there any regions where you're seeing a growing tide of protectionism, a move towards those more protectionist
You always see bits and pieces of it, but probably our biggest concern at the moment is what might happen with TPP, only because of the signal it sends. I mean, on the other side of the coin, we're having some quite positive outcomes in our meeting with Tusk from the EU. Looked really successful. We're quite hopeful we were going with Saudi Arabia. We're making some quite good progress, we think, in terms of moving things forward. But our big issue really is TPP at the moment.
Do you have any early soundings on the straw poll tomorrow morning?
No.
You don't know what our officials aren't saying some countries are moving for or against them?
Well, somebody said to me, if everyone who's pledged to vote for Helen does, she'll be the next Secretary General, but that's politics, isn't it?
That's every step until now, or just this time?
Sorry?
That's every step until now, or just this time?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's one of those things where, what politics is like.
Are we
Counting
reliant?
heads is one thing, but actually getting the ticks on the paper is often quite different.
Are we, her chances reliant entirely on the exercise of the veto by the permanent members?
To a certain degree. I mean, as I said when I was in New York, I think it's highly likely she herself will get vetoes ultimately. Not obviously not tomorrow because that's not the case, but I think in October when they start being able to hold up red cards, I think she will pick up some vetoes. The question is how many and how serious they are. So it's not unusual for a veto to be applied, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. But at some point you can get a veto where the country vetoing you just says no way, no how. Now, I don't think that's where that's at, but I certainly wouldn't be too alarmed if I saw her pick up one or two. I think it's possible. It's a lot more. You should be concerned about that.
Just quickly on housing,
Yeah.
the latest stats and figures show that 78% of those renting are now worth less than $120,000, meaning they can't scrape to get that 20% deposit. Does that concern you that effectively?
Sorry, one more time. 78%.
78% are worth less than $120,000.
Do you mean in terms of their household income or their assets?
Their assets, so they can't scrape to get to that 20%. So they're effectively locked out of.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth remembering that if that's based off the median house price in Auckland, people don't always go and buy the average house price. People go and buy a range of different houses. I mean, so if you need to put up 20% and you're buying a $400,000 house, you need less obviously, you need $80,000. So it just depends on what's happening. It's also not true that every person has to get 70 or 80% of the by mortgage and the rest by deposit. What it says is the banks have a certain amount of their balance sheet that could be in high LVR loans. So it just varies. I mean, some people will buy a property that's leasehold. Some people will be able to use KiwiSaver Home Start. If you're in anywhere outside of Auckland, the deposits you require are a lot lower as a general rule.
Would you support a move to exempt first-time buyers from those LVRs?
I think it's a matter for the governor to consider. I mean, we certainly encouraged him to look at those kinds of things. I mean, our priority is to try and assist first-time buyers, which is why we've got KiwiSaver Home Start. But the only point we keep making is that whenever people take a mortgage down against their property, they just need to think through not only what they're borrowing today and their capacity to service that mortgage, but what might happen in the future. In the same way we would expect a bank to stress test their balance sheet and ask the obvious questions of what happens if unemployment rises or interest rates rise. It's equally true that a household needs to think at least about those factors of how risky their employment is, or ultimately how much capacity they've got to withstand rising interest rates. Because at some point interest rates will rise. Not necessarily today or tomorrow. If they're on a fixed rate mortgage, then they know for how long they're locked in, but at some point